Today we're going to be taking a look at the Godox F600Bi. Now, as always on this channel, this isn't going to be a spec rundown. I want to talk about the practical use case scenarios for this light. I've been using it for about 2 months on and off on different sets, and so I want to talk about how it fits into day-to-day workflow. We'll cover the positives, the negatives, and then the somewhere in between gray area of this light. Now, Godox did send me this demo unit to test and review, but no one gets to see this before I post it, and there was no money exchange, so these are my honest thoughts and opinions. If you're new here, my name's Keaton. I'm a DP based in Oklahoma. I also developed this app called CineTemp. CineTemp is a quick way to calculate and find the white balance of a room. And coming in 2.0, we're also able to estimate and calculate the ND needed for a given scene. Now 2.0 is ready, we're just waiting on a few App Store things, and so once the App Store things go through, then we will release 2.0. Now let's dive into point 1, and that's why I was excited about this light. Through my journey, I've been in the industry for about 10 years. It's always a struggle to get a large source in a very tight space. And so a light mat is a way to do that. Having such a large, thin source allows you to put an extremely large source in a very small area. And a lot of the times whenever we're doing interviews like in somebody's house or we're inside of a tight confined area, it's always hard to get a large source in those areas. For example, if you want a large soft source in a space, a lot of the times you're going to have to use a rag or a big softbox, and those can take up a lot of space. And sometimes the areas that we're put in doesn't allow for such a large fixture. And I think that that's where this light really shines. You're able to get a really large source in a relatively small space. It almost feels like you have a portable window that you can move around in really tight scenarios. Another thing that I've appreciated about this light is that it's a 600-watt panel, and so whenever you're able to get that panel really close to your interview subject, you're able to keep up with a lot of background like bright windows. The last thing that got me excited about trying this light was how small it packs down to. I run a medium-sized van, so having a relatively large source that packs down into a relatively small case was a huge benefit because space is always at a premium in this van. Now let's move on to section 2, which is what I love about this light. The first is the light quality of the light. As we all know, the larger the light source is, typically the more smooth, soft, and flattering the light quality is, and that's exactly what this light delivers. And as we talked about, I think another benefit and something that I love about this light is how versatile it is. After I've been using this for the last couple of months, I've used it in different scenarios. I've used it as a fake window inside of a church for a movie that we were shooting. I've used it on interview subjects, and I've used it as room fill. Now, this light has been an incredible resource for those particular scenarios, and I really love it for interviews because you're able to dim it down by 0.1%, which is one of the things that I love. Like I mentioned earlier, on the movie we were working on, we were able to fill the entire window with these Godox 600Bis, basically just making these windows white and giving a key to the background actors, and then on the third window, we shot a 1200X through it and gave the key to our main subject. Now, what was really cool about this scenario, we had these lights at full tilt. We were blasting 600 watts through those. But then on the flip side, whenever I'm doing interviews in smaller and darker areas, we're able to dim down to the 0.1% ranges. And overall, the color accuracy and the dimmability were relatively reliable and accurate. But that brings me to the next point, which is the frustrations with this light. Now, the first main frustration that I had with this light was at the very, very low end of the dimmability of the power of the light. If you're changing the CCT, I think it's between 4,000 and 4,300, you see like a 200-degree shift whenever you're changing that CCT. And I think that that's basically when the next set of LEDs is kicking on. But you don't really notice that if you're at 100% power on the light. You can change all the way from the low end of the CCT all the way to the high end of the CCT and not see any jump. That being said, that was one of the frustrations that I had with this light. If you're using it at a really low percentage and you change the CCT, there is an area, I think it's around the 4,000, 4,300 mark, where the second set of LEDs does kick on and you can see a noticeable shift. I didn't get any footage of that, and that didn't really cause any true problems on set. That was just something that I wanted to note, and it was a slight frustration because I'd like to see a smooth across the entire range. Now, the other thing that was a frustration with this light is just assembling it. This is a light that you're not going to put up by yourself. I think this is a light of 2 people minimum. The way that the frame builds is pretty easy, but then attaching the light to the actual frame, it can take a little bit of time. But I think that that's one of the trade-offs that you have when you have a light that's able to fold and store so compactly. Obviously, it's not a rigid panel, it's malleable and it moves a little bit, and so whenever you're putting it on the frame and you're using these bungee ties, although everything works well and it works as intended, it does take a little bit of time to do. And then the last thing that's not necessarily a frustration, but something that I wanted to note is there is no green magenta shift correction. Now, I would say 95% of the shooting that I do doesn't need that as long as the light itself is accurate, and it's actually something that they addressed in a new model, the F800, but it's something that I wanted to note. But that brings me on to section 4, which is the middle ground of this light. Like I mentioned, there is no green magenta shift correction on this particular unit, but the F800 does have that, and so that may be something that I look at adding onto the truck somewhere down the road. Now, the F800 comes in around $3,200, and the F600 is $1,290. So for that price difference, you really have to consider how many times you're going to use color on that light. The F800 has full color range, full RGB. The F600 is bicolor, all the way from 2700 to 6000, I believe. But the F800 is also 800 watts, which is 200 watts of power additional over the F600. But for me, whenever I'm thinking about it and debating with myself, I could have 2 F600 lights for the price of 1 F800. And whenever I'm doing a lot of interviews, the F600 might make more sense, just in terms of ROI of the cost of the light. So whenever I debate between the F800 and the F600, I really feel like the F600 hits a sweet spot, especially for a lot of people in the industry. Now, before we wrap this video up, let's talk about what's included in the box. In the box, you get the light panel, you get a ballast, an extended head cable lead, a soft box with a diffuser, a honeycomb grid for the soft box, and the frame itself. Now, I will say over the last couple months, whenever I've been using this light, when I first had it, it was hard to mount it at an angle. So I ordered this extended pin off of Amazon, which has been a really good addition for this particular light, which allows me to put it at an angle with a grip head whenever I'm using a heavy enough stand like my beefy baby. Now, let's wrap this up and let's talk about my final thoughts, the strengths, weaknesses of the light, and who I think that this light is for. Now, let's start with the strengths of this light. And one, I think that that's the gorgeous light quality that you get from this light without any additional modifiers necessary. I've used this light as a 4x source into an 8x, which creates a very, very beautiful light, but also just the light by itself creates an insanely gorgeous light quality, especially when you're able to get that source really close to the subject. And second is the versatility of this light. This light is really incredible. It's a really good key light, especially for interview subjects. It's also a really good fill light in larger scenes. And then my buddy Easton Oliver also borrowed this light while I've had it on loan, and he used it as a top-down light on a psych wall shoot that he was doing, and it also performed really well for that because you're able to get a relatively large source in a really thin and compact profile. And then the last strength of this light is the strong dimming capabilities of the light itself. Being able to get down to 0.1% without any flicker is a huge accomplishment, especially for a light this size and quality. Now let's talk about the weaknesses of this light. If you're doing a lot of run and gun work, I don't think that this light is necessarily for you because it does require some setup time, and it's not something that you're just going to throw up and throw together. There is that low end color shift that I mentioned, which didn't necessarily bust any shots, but it's something to note, and I think that it's a weakness just because you definitely see that second row of LEDs kick on. And then the last general weakness of this light is that there is no green magenta shift. Now, for me, a lot of the times that's not a huge deal, but I think that it is something worth considering and mentioning if you're looking at getting into a panel light itself. You may consider the F800 if that's an absolute necessity. Now, who do I think that this light is for? If you're doing a lot of corporate and commercial content, you're doing a lot of interviews, or you're doing a lot of mid-sized productions, I think that this light is a really good fit for a lot of those use cases because you're able to get a relatively large light into a relatively small case, which is a huge benefit, especially if you're running a smaller truck or even running out of your car. The light quality and power that you get out of the light, given the size of the case, is pretty impressive. So if you're looking for a big, soft, versatile light, especially for interviews or interiors, I think the F600Bi is a fantastic tool. Now, of course, it's not a perfect light. There is no perfect light, but even given its quirks, this is one of my favorite fixtures that I've had on set in the last couple of years. My name's Keaton. I'm sharing my journey and what I've learned along the way. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue growing together, consider subscribing. This is just the beginning of the conversation.